Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and I'm also a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to make a two-part video regarding men who remain involuntarily single and they want to get into a relationship and what methods they can use to heighten their chances. I've made a video like this before. However, one barrier that came up in that video, which I still think I put a lot of research into that video, but there was two parts of it that some people were bringing up, and that's why I'm making this video. First of all, a lot of you guys are new, but second, a lot of that was informational, so there wasn't as much information on what to do, but some of those things were a little bit out of your control. Geographical location was one of them, being a certain age, trauma, and this is also part of that, but I'm focusing a little bit more. Not all of them are what you can control, but a lot of them are going to be things that you can control, which is why the second part of the video, which I might put before this one or after, I'm not sure, they're supposed to be used together. And that's kind of what I wanted to mention. Also with that video, right out the gate, I mentioned that some people want to be single. A lot of you guys say you want to be single, you choose to be single. And so this video is not necessarily for folks who choose to be single. It's people who end up single even though they don't want to be. And first, we're going to talk about psychological factors. I'm going to break it up into a couple sections so it's a little easier to follow, or that's my hope. Psychological factors is the first one is low self-esteem. Men with lower self-esteem are slower to enter relationships, and they tend to have poorer quality, like poor relationship quality, meaning they accept abuse more often, they accept manipulation, they might not be able to be aware of it. They also might sabotage their own relationships, which can affect the quality. And they're slower to enter relationships because a lot of men who have lower self-esteem are more hesitant to make particular moves or take more risks in dating and relationships in general. Another aspect that I saw in the research was that a lot of these men do not speak up for what they want in relationships as well, which also creates that poor quality relationship. The next one is mental health. Specifically, we're talking about social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression, particularly social anxiety and depression, where these aspects correlate with fewer romantic relationships among men based on plenty of research. One of them was 1997, but there are more updated ones, and one of those more updated ones had found that socially anxious individuals report fewer dating experiences, and they actually avoid more intimate exposure, meaning that a lot of these men and women actually, but more particularly for men, they don't initiate because of the fear of rejection. And that can create a lot of issues with the dynamic of relationships because still in the society currently, as I'm speaking United States, a lot of women do not make the move. And I know a lot of you guys get mad about that, but a lot of them are not going to initiate. And even if they do, they might not necessarily know what they're looking for. And I'm not saying to disregard what women say or what they want. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that men and women behave a little bit differently in relationships. Women can sometimes be a little bit, they're not as warm to you, or maybe a little bit lukewarm to say. And eventually, as the relationship goes on, they fall very hard for you or they really like you. And usually it's because women are expecting, like women fall in love with what they hear and what they see more so. And men fall in love with the way people, like how women are, how they present themselves, how they look. And so unfortunately, that dynamic, sometimes men have to feel like they have to earn love, which there is some accuracy to it, right? And that's for another video. But a lot of women, they fall in love with the effort that you give. And so with people who are socially anxious, they're afraid to give that effort because of fear of rejection. And so a lot of times it's hard for a woman to even know if she wants this guy or not. And I know that's going to make a lot of people mad, but there's no point in me being dishonest with you. I don't make videos just to be dishonest, just to get views and just say, yeah, if you work out in the gym, one day girls are going to come up to you and like you. That's probably going to happen, maybe. But I'm going to make another video about like more women who are more like desiring relationship or breaking those norms. A lot of them are a little bit more mentally unstable. Not all of them, but I'm going to explain that in another video, which is why a lot of these men tend to be in relationships with those women, because men who are a little uncomfortable with initiating, a lot of times they're going to be with a woman who is very comfortable with initiating, but these women tend to be very emotionally needy. And so often if you're not doing what she wants, she's going to cheat on you, or she's going to there's a lot of dynamics to that. And I'm not done with that research. So like the video for that. So we'll talk about that another time. But in general, social anxiety for men more particularly predicts relationship initiation difficulties, which creates a lot of issues for men. Now, the next one is personality traits, okay? Now, I put this one in psychological factors because the study of personality is something that we had to learn in my doctoral program a lot, and so I consider that a psychological factor. Maybe some of you guys will disagree, but this is something that was very common. A lot of the assessments have a lot of personality correlations that we had to learn about extensively. And so any sort of high neurotic traits, but and then low agreeableness. That's the combination that are linked to men and women, but more common with men that's linked to singlehood and difficulty forming relationships. This research was in 2002. However, a lot of people don't really know what neurotic means. A lot of people have a different opinion of it or perspective without knowing the actual terminology. And I would recommend you look into these terms. But in general, we can just say somebody who's a little bit more controlling of certain aspects, or a little bit more uncomfortable with uncertainty, or a little bit more comfortable with predictability. That's a good way to look at it for now. There's a lot more details to it. The next one I'm going to talk about, I put it in the same section because there's not as much of this, because maybe it's just very black and white. Physical and socioeconomic factors, okay? The first one is the one that a lot of you guys get upset that I don't bring up more often, even though I made a video on it. Physical attractiveness, I'm going to specifically talk about height because a lot of you guys bring it up and it is a factor. Research 2008. Taller men are more likely to be in relationships. That's all I'm going to touch on it because I've made a video on it in general. The next one is income and financial stability. Men with higher income and educational status, or even prospects, like them wanting more education, things like that, they are more likely to be in a relationship. Low socioeconomic status predicts prolonged singlehood, but it's for both relationships, like both genders. More higher with men, but it's like people who are in more lower socioeconomic status, they tend to have more unpredictable relationships. The study is a very, very large sample. It's about 55K. That's pretty big. And it found that men with higher income is more likely to marry, less likely to divorce, and more likely to get remarried after divorce. That's a lot of information in my opinion, and it makes a lot of sense. And they're actually less likely to remain childless. And this research, that one, the one I just mentioned, was 2021. It's a huge research. I think, as far as I remember, I think it took 2 decades to collect this data. And why this is very interesting is because there's a couple factors that I want to break up, and you can look in the research as well. Some of these men, because they're more settled, they sometimes seek relationships, because whether women want to accept this or not, I think there's some truth to it. The dating stage, I think women have more choices to some extent. But I think when it comes to getting married, men are more likely to make that decision. And probably because men are the decision makers typically of relationships. I'm not sure. That's just what I notice, placeholder thought. But I think that's part of it. A lot of men who are in a more comfortable, stable situation, maybe they're more likely to seek marriage. However, on the flip side, women tend to want to marry men with higher income because a lot of women think that's stable. Maybe a lot of women want to be housewives, whatever it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. But these men just have a lot more opportunities, obviously, right? I think that's no one is shocked by that. But it is interesting because the research is so large. There's a lot of good information in that research. The next one is health and disability aspects. I kind of put this one in the physical aspects as well as socioeconomic aspects because I think it correlates with both, okay? So chronic illness and disability can reduce dating likelihood and relationship formation. This research was in 2006, but we don't know what the disability is. It could be that maybe this man has trouble walking. That would be a physical issue, right? Health, sometimes they cannot resolve their health issues as quickly due to financial barriers. And so that's why I put it in this section, but I wasn't entirely sure. The last section is the social and environmental factors. Now, we touched on this a little bit in the other video I made, so I'm not going to touch on it too much because it's a little bit harder to adjust, particularly the last one. But the first one is social network size. Men tend to have smaller social networks in general. That's just based on a lot of this research. This research was 2 decades, so maybe the other one wasn't. I could have mixed it up. But looking at my notes, I specifically wrote this one as a research that was done in for 2 decades, 1985 to 2004, okay? And what we saw is men with smaller social networks, even smaller than the average male, or fewer friends, have fewer opportunities to meet potential partners. That's pretty obvious. But when we analyze the data spanning 2 decades, we actually saw that the changes in social networks, if they increase those social networks, they actually get less limitations and they get more higher likelihood to be in relationships. This sounds obvious, but no matter what is obvious, research should still be there, in my opinion. Otherwise, we are just stating opinions, and we don't want that in science, especially not with something so serious such as divorce, which can affect so many lives. And then the other aspect of it is actually men who become more socially isolated for these 2 decades, they actually decrease their chance of relationships to such a point where a lot of them are pulling away from relationships. A lot of them are finding themselves struggling even more, and a lot of negativity is showing up as well. These are adults 18 and above. This is not limited to men, by the way. However, the data about men was very detailed as well, just with ladies, but more particularly, we saw that actually men are impacted by this much more frequently and for longer periods of time. So they're single for longer, they're impacted much more extensively, more frequently, and it affects them greatly, okay? And the last one is what we've touched on previously in the other video, cultural and geographical contexts. Men with areas where there's just fewer available partners, gender imbalances, are more likely to remain single if they want to date women. I don't really have any countries on the top of my head which has this relationship, but I think in the United States, women are more common. I could be wrong. I could have forgotten, but I think that's really important. Now, some of this research, I don't know if some of this research, but some of the research I use is quantitative, and I want to talk a little bit about that before we wrap up this video. Now, for my dissertation, I'm doing qualitative research. I prefer qualitative or mixed method research, but I think there is some misconception about quantitative research. And even though I don't prefer quantitative research, at least not this time, I want to break something up that a lot of people get misconception about. So for my doctoral program, which pretty much every doctoral program, we have to learn most types of methods that we're going to run into once we we get our PhD, that we're awarded that. So qualitative, I have much more specifics and specializations on qualitative because that's what I want to learn. However, we still had to learn quantitative methods. And for one course, I had to do a quantitative method for survey construction. And it was a smaller sample size because it's school, but my sample size was 50. And I still did something for my dissertation just to understand the differences between, it was the same topic, just to understand the differences of the research and what I can get the data out of it. But what I found is actually a lot of people think that quantitative research is just like surveying random people and their opinions can really skew because they don't understand what they're saying or maybe they're lying. There is truth to that. However, when you do the field testing or the pilot testing, you do so many different things to see how reliable it is. My first time for my pilot test, I had one inventory, like one item that was negatively scoring, which just means that basically it was not testing what the other items were testing. So I had to redo that one, even though I felt so confident about my survey and I was kind of like shocked. But then when I looked at it, I realized it was too detailed. Like it was too opinionated. The question had too many angles to it, which some people could think the answer being yes is a good thing. Some people think yes is a bad thing. There's like way too many opinions in that exact question. And so I had to break it up and I had to basically redo some parts of my survey. And then once I did that, my reliability score went up and that item was no longer showing the way it was. And so what I'm trying to say is just because something is a survey doesn't mean that it's just like some random kid on SurveyMonkey or whatever it's called making a survey with no details in it. There's a lot of effort into a lot of these things. It's run multiple times before actually collecting the data that you guys see when it's published. And so just give other methods a chance. And I'm saying this as someone, as I mentioned, who prefers qualitative methods. But still, I just want you guys to keep that in mind when you're looking at some of this data. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.